Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my history presentation. You're probably the largest crowd I've had since the staff had staff week, so thank you, I appreciate it. My name is Troy Brokenshire. I am a longtime Minsi participant. You know, I come here, my first year was 1984 with my troop. I became a CIT in 86. I joined the staff in 89. Was program director by 94. Got laid off 2 times and came up here both times for the summer because they gave me a nice severance package. So I was here in 98 and 09 as well. I was a member of Explorer Post 940, now Venture Crew 940. On the council level, I am a member of the Council Heritage Committee and a unit commissioner for Northampton County, Northampton District. So, which one of these guys is me? Who can tell?
One on the right.
On the right, this guy?
Yeah.
This one. That's me. That's me. 1987. We're down on the jetty at the Econ Lodge. This is my pal Joe Balla. So I'm going to take a few detours during this, just so you know. It's not going to be, it'll be chronological, but I'm going to have to kind of do a little side show for a little bit. But about 4 years ago, Scoutmaster here asked me what the true history of Camp Minsi was. And I had always fancied myself a historian of Minsi, but I had never really done any work to find the actual history. So, you know, honestly, I could not answer him. I said, I don't know. But I would love to find out. And on my way home from that evening, it occurred to me that I had a newspapers.com account that came with my ancestry.com account because I'm my family's genealogist. So as soon as I got home, I did a search for Camp Minsi on newspapers.com, came back with 2,300 hits. There were a few Camp Minsis. There was one out in Reading that was a sub-camp of another larger camp, and there was a girls' camp in New Jersey. Those are the 2 local ones. So I kind of narrowed it down some more, got to about 1,800 articles, kept narrowing down, and now I have about 730 or so articles specifically about Camp Minsi. And they're almost exclusively from the Morning Call because the Morning Call has digitized all of their archives. Unfortunately, the Bethlehem and the Easton newspapers have not. So there are stories hidden in those papers. I've been slowly going to I live in Easton, so I've been going to the Easton Public Library and going through the microfilm. And for you kids that don't know what microfilm is, it's a roll of film about that wide, and you put it through the machine, and you have a screen. These days you get a computer monitor. Back in the day it was a big machine with a screen. But you go literally 1 page at a time through the newspaper. There's no character recognition, there's no search, there's not even a keyboard. So, well, that's wrong, there is a keyboard and a mouse. But you can't do a search of the film because it's film, it's analog. Luckily though, Morning Call has a lot of articles about Camp Minsi. So, after 4 years, I finally feel like I can tell the story. If you are interested in history, if you're interested in scouting history, we do have a council, and if you're a member of Minsi Trails Council, we have a heritage committee. We welcome anybody at any time, and we've got a nice collection of patches and uniforms and documents and all sorts of neat things at the council office. And hopefully one day we'll have a museum where we can put them all so you can see it. If you're over 18 and you have nothing to do on a Saturday or you know, maybe after work on a Friday and you'd like to help me go 1 page at a time through microfilm, see me after the presentation. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about the history of Camp Minsi, but first we have to talk about a little bit of council history. So is anyone here not from Minsi Trails Council? You guys are not. Where are you from? Okay, Jersey Shore. So this camp serves the kids of the Lehigh Valley and surrounding areas, and I'll get into that in a second. But before Minsi Trails Council existed, there were 3 councils in the Lehigh Valley: Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. The Lehigh Valley is an area about 50 miles north of here that is surrounded, it's got mountains, Blue Mountains on the top and South Mountain down here. It has the 3 cities: Allentown, Bethlehem, and this is Easton. It says home because that's where I live. And Easton, and their councils all serve like the surrounding area, sort of like in a semicircle or an oval around them. And so before Minsi Trails Council, the 3 councils ran 3 different camps. So we had Allentown Council was kind of late to the game. They formed in 1926. They were the latest of the 3 councils to form. They were later renamed Lehigh County Council, Area Council. They ran Camp Trexler, which was later renamed Trexler Scout Reservation in 1965. Bethlehem was the first to form a council in the Lehigh Valley in 1917. They were always Bethlehem Area Council. Their name never changed. And they served the kids of all of Bethlehem, even the parts that are in Lehigh County, and the surrounding areas. And then Easton Council formed in 1918. They served the kids of Easton and parts of New Jersey, Nazareth, I'm not sure what else down below them there, but they had Camp Wygant. Camp Wygant closed in 1969, but we'll get into that. And in the early 30s, they also bought a camp up here that the Monroe County kids were using. It was on the Delaware River, just like Camp Wygant, and it was called Camp Dearbone. I've not done a whole lot of research about Camp Dearbone. I just know that Easton Council did own it. So in 1969, scouting was getting larger in the Lehigh Valley and the surrounding areas. More and more kids were getting involved, and also that year, Camp Wygant and Camp Dearbone closed, and they had to merge with those. Those campers had to come to either Minsi or Trexler. So it was decided amongst the 3 councils that they were going to merge and form one single council, and that council was Minsi Trails in 1969. And Minsi Trails ran both Camp Minsi and Camp Trexler. Sadly, this is Camp Trexler's last season. So they went out to a professional marketer in 1970, and they had them draw up 4 different possible logos for the new council, and who knows which one they picked. This one right here, right? So I like this one. This one's okay, and this one seems a bit amateurish to me. I can't believe that a professional drew that, but there we go. So they put it in the Minsi. If you were a member of the Minsi Trails Council prior to 2007, you would have gotten a newspaper, a physical newspaper in your mailbox every month from the Minsi Trails Council called the Minsi Trail. And this is an article from the Minsi Trail, as were those pictures. They wanted the scouts and scouters to submit their votes. They did it over a 1-month period, and they chose this new logo. The 3 doves represent the 3 councils that merged. The 13 pine trees represent the 13 districts that existed among those 3 councils. When the council when they did merge, they chopped that down to about 8, and later on it got chopped down even more, and now we're at 5. And now this is what I've been told over the years. So there's nothing in writing saying that this is what this means, but enough people have told it over the years that I believe that it's true. And I believe this to be the Minsi Trail, or the Minsi Path, which was a footpath that ran from the Philadelphia area, and a wagon path from Philadelphia up through Easton and Bethlehem and up into New York. It was used by the Lenape Indians and by the early settlers. So, if you're good at math and you listened to me this morning and you know about World War I, who can tell me what year Camp Minsi started? Sorry? 1983? No, not quite. The second one, 1919. So the armistice for World War I was signed on 11th of November 1918, and just about 7 or 8 months later, Camp Minsi opened its doors. It wasn't located here. This is the 4th location, and you're gonna learn all about that. So this is the Delaware Water Gap. So down, again, a bit south of here, there's the Blue Mountain, and where the Delaware River splits the Blue Mountain, that's Delaware Water Gap. And it separates, the Delaware River separates New Jersey from Pennsylvania. So on the Pennsylvania side, we have Mount Minsi, and on the New Jersey side, we have Mount Tammany. Now this is looking north. The camp was on the New Jersey side. Why? Because that's where there was land for them to lease. So this is the only thing I'll read to you. I just love this quote. It says, "When the old stone face of Mount Tammany looked southward in 1919, beheld a group of pioneer scouts marching under the full camping equipment along that long, long trail which winds along the glimmering shores of the Delaware River." It's a bit wordy. "Onward, ever onward, floated the flag of the Bethlehem Scouts until a place of such magnificence and splendor was reached that the party automatically halted in the main camp. To this very day, 8 years later, we still hold to this picturesque spot as our summer headquarters." This was an article written in the Camp Minsi Chronicle, which I'll tell you about in a second. The Camp Minsi Chronicle was a newspaper written and published by the kids at camp. So this is from 1926. This was the very first actual proof that I had that Camp Minsi started in 1919. The ranger had given me a copy of this Camp Minsi Chronicle. I kind of stuffed it in the seat in my car between the console and the driver's seat, and it sat there for years. And one time I kept saying, I gotta look at those things, go look at those things. And I'm doing all this research, and probably 3 years into it, I finally pull them out, and I open it up, and I read the very first paragraph, the one that was on top, and that was the quote. So now I know with certainty that the camp opened in 1919, and so I went to the Easton Library, looked at the Bethlehem newspapers, confirmed that, and also found some editions of these Camp Minsi Chronicles. And this, as I said, was a newspaper that was written and published by the boys at camp, but they also gave a copy, thankfully, to the Bethlehem Globe, and the Bethlehem Globe reprinted it every week. These things are full of all sorts of jokes. The jokes they told about each other are absolutely brutal, and the BSA would never allow it today. But they're very funny. They gave them these volume and edition numbers. I thought, oh, that's great. I'm going to be able to get them, put them all in order. They make no sense. They just told whoever came in and did the paper that week just gave it a volume and edition out of thin air. So they don't are they're not in any sort of order except by the date. So one day I will collect all of these. I do know that they were published at least up until 1956. I don't know if they were continuously published or if it stopped and started or what, but I know there's mention of it in 56, and it possibly went on further beyond that. So does anybody know why it's spelled chronicle or chronicle, anyone? No? I just found this out this summer. I had no idea. I kept seeing these. I'm like, why the heck would they spell it like that? And the name changed many times. It was Camp Minsi with K, Camp Minsi with C, Chronicle with a K, Chronicle with a C. This is the very first one in 1919, and it's called the Dunfield Camp Chronicle because the town of Dunfield was north of them, and maybe, I think at this time they'd already known it was going to be called Camp Minsi, but for whatever reason they called it the Dunfield Chronicle, but the very next edition, it was changed to the Camp Minsi Chronicle. So, Pennsylvania is full of Pennsylvania Dutch. The Lehigh Valley had, at one time at least, a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch folks who spoke German. And the German word for a chronicle is chronic. So I believe that this is just a little play that they did on that spelling, which I thought was kind of neat. And I presented it to the staff, and I asked them, does anybody know why? Because I had no idea. And one of the gentlemen that isn't really on staff, but he comes up here a lot, he said, well, that's the German spelling. I said, oh, of course, that makes total sense. So anyway, that's why it's spelled that way. So this article is from 1919, and this tells us it's to be called Camp Minsi. Doesn't tell us why, but I've got my theories, and later articles confirm those theories for me. And that theory was that, if you remember from that picture of the Delaware River, Mount Minsi was on the Pennsylvania side, Mount Tammany is on the New Jersey side. They're camping out at Mount Tammany, and they can see across the river Mount Minsi. Since they're from Bethlehem, they called themselves Minsi. So Minsi is the name of a subtribe of the Lenape. It's also called Muncie, spelled different ways. And as I said, they're part of the Lenape, who were the Delaware people, and they're called the Delaware by the settlers. They were cheated out of their land, including where we are here, by the walking purchase. You can Google that. I'm not going to go into it. But let's just say William Penn's sons were not very nice people after their dad died. But it didn't make much of a difference, because not too long later, in 1830, Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and forced all of the eastern Native Americans west, and the Lenape ended up in Kansas, Indiana, Oklahoma, all sorts of places out that way. So around here, the Lenape, they lived along the Delaware River, which is this here, and they had three different sort of subtribes: the Munsi, the Northern Unami, and the Southern Unami. Now, this is a little bit misleading, because there were people who spoke Munsi down in our areas. This is the Lehigh Valley right here that I was telling you about. This is the Delaware Water Gap where the camp first was. No, it's not. Wait, is it? This is Jersey, right? Yes. So Delaware Water Gap's right there, and we're like up in here somewhere. So the Munsi lived in the area. They had their totem of a wolf, and we're always trying to figure out where our turtle came from. Well, the Unami had the turtle as their totem, and they were the dominant Lenape clan in our area. I saw there's an article from 1958 that says that we get our turtle mascot from the Munsi, but obviously that is wrong, because that was not their mascot. Okay, so does anybody, and you might know, maybe one of you two fellows might know the name of the camp that I was always told when I was a kid, where Camp Minsi started. People say, well, you know, Camp Minsi started at Camp, begins with a W, if anybody remembers. Anyone? Wygap. Very good. They told me it started at Camp Wygap. Camp Wygap, it was located south of Camp Minsi, on the same land, near the Mount Tammany. The land was owned by the Philadelphia Trust Company. It was a little bit north of Columbia, New Jersey, and they both camps rented from the Philadelphia Trust Company. But I know Camp Wygap, or Camp Minsi, could not have been at Camp Wygap, because Camp Wygap did not exist when Camp Minsi opened. The Easton Council leased this land in 1921. They called their camp Yarnell, after a vice president. In 22 and 23, they called it Gishanayan, or Gishanaxim, or Gishanaxin, depending on which article you read. And then finally, in 1924, they called it Wygap. The two camps did interact with each other. They played sports against each other, mostly baseball, but they would also have campfires together and things like that. Camp Wygap was closed in 1969 because of the Tops Island Dam project on the Delaware River, where this camp existed and Camp Dearborn existed. There was a plan that came about in the mid-60s. Actually, they started talking about it in the 50s, but they really started working on it in the mid-60s, where at Tops Island on the Delaware River, which is about 7 miles north of the Delaware Water Gap, they were going to put a dam. They were going to create a 40-mile long and 1 mile wide reservoir that could be used for boating and recreation and things like this. And they wanted to do it also to implement some sort of flood control, because Easton and some of the towns along the Delaware River were getting flooded pretty badly, especially in 1955, where it washed out the bridges and lots of people died. So Pennsylvania, New Jersey, they got together to form this entity that was going to buy up all this land and create this thing. They bought up all the land. They forced people out. They used eminent domain. They closed down 30, probably more camps along the Delaware River. And then it never happened. It never happened. There was so much opposition against it by the locals and by environmentalists that it kept getting delayed. And finally, they did another test of the area, the Army Corps of Engineers, and they determined, the geology around here is not strong enough, not the right type of rock or whatever to allow us to build a dam. So it was finally shut down like 1975. They just stopped everything, and Congress defunded it in the 80s sometime. So it never happened, and all those camps closed, including Camp Wygad. So Camp Wygad, folks, we got a lot of their staff, we got their ranger, we got their cannon, and I'm sure a bunch of other things. But they came over here, or they went to Camp Trexler, or they went to other camps. But I know a lot of them did come here. So just to familiarize you with the terrain again, this is the Delaware Water Gap. Mount Minsi is in Pennsylvania, Mount Tammany is in New Jersey. This rectangle I have pushed up a bit high because this is the very base of the mountain, so here it starts to go vertical. So Camp Minsi could not have, they messed around in there, they hiked around in there, but their tents and everything were down in here, and their swimming hole was right here. And I'll show you evidence of that in a minute. Camp Wygad was about a mile south of them, so it was down around here. I'll show you something in a minute to show you that in more detail. Keep this here island in your memory. You're going to see it a little bit later. Here's a better, longer view. Here we have Portland, Pennsylvania, and Columbia, New Jersey. So this is a covered footbridge. The boys would often go from Camp Minsi, which was here, or Camp Wygad, which was here. They would follow the Dunfield Path, which is that path they talked about in the quote, as they were hiking north from Columbia, New Jersey, up the Dunfield Path. They came upon this magnificent spot at the base of the mountain, and they made camp. There was a girls' camp over here called Camp Anung, and in a few of those Camp Minsi Chronicle papers, they make fun of each other for, the boys walking a mile down to here and going across, going up to visit the girls and whatnot. So those were fun to read. There was a railroad track that ran up along here. I believe there may still be one. The council convinced the owners of the railroad to stop in Columbia, New Jersey to get their groceries and their mail and anything else they needed. And they came up here very slowly to the camp, and they stopped and they unloaded at the camp, and then the train went on its way north or south. But I thought that was pretty clever. There's that island again. Okay, when you go back, so let's forget this. So we got that island. Right here, this little brown, this black dot, this is where Camp Wygad eventually ended up after Camp Minsi moved. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this is their swimming hole. And again, that closed in '69. This is what that swimming hole looks like today. This is their parade field. The dining hall is still there and used for storage. They would have camped up in these areas. Fire circles over here. Now you can still go to this today. I've been there. And there's tent platforms are still there, flagpoles, all sorts of things, falling down cabins are still there. But you can't just drive up to it and walk in. You have to make arrangements because it's fenced off. So John Buzz, the ranger here, 2 different times set up arrangements for alumni and other folks and people who worked at Camp Wygad to go there and visit not too long ago. So I thought that was pretty cool. So now back to Camp Minsi. We have here a few photographs. These are all from this book up here. Some of them are very tiny, and I blew them up, 1200 DPI, but they did not have a Camp Minsi sign at this site. They just put out a sign that said Bethlehem Boy Scouts. So you would, when you were driving or walking up the path, you would see that and know where they are. These are their tents. There's no platforms. They're right on the ground. They look like they're floating here, but that's because their flaps are rolled up for a little bit of air to go through. But here you can tell they're right at the base of this mountain. This is a truck made by Hoffman and Scheimer. Hoffman and Scheimer were carriage builders in Bethlehem. They built horse and buggy carriages, and then they built automobiles. They went out of business by 1924, so that we know that this photograph was taken sometime between 1919 and 1924. There's actually a newspaper article that talks about the boys being taken from Bethlehem to Camp Minsi on the Hoffman and Scheimer automobile or contraption, or they call it all sorts of funny things back then. But I don't know if the BSA would allow this anymore. What do you think? Riding on. So from Bethlehem to Camp Minsi at that time was a 2-hour drive over dirt roads and at very slow speeds, because these things didn't travel very fast because there were dirt roads and their engines just couldn't. Today that drive would take about 40 minutes. And here they are on the Delaware River. As I showed you before, that little island, this is the top of that island right here. I know that because I confirmed it, because on Google Earth I can zoom in and I can see these two giant boulders right here. So now this is a river, okay? It's not a lake, it's a river. So you can imagine that they probably worried quite a bit when the boys were out on this river, because they could get swept away. If it rained or something, it would very easily be able to be swept away. Now, I haven't come across any articles that said anyone died, so as far as I know, no one did. But they swam there and they boated there. This is a diving platform they would build every year. I imagine they shoved it out farther than this because that's pretty close to shore, but maybe not. Maybe there's a deep thing there. But see this guy here, far away in the boat? I imagine he's there to catch anybody who might have floated downstream accidentally. So he's a lifeguard. So how would you like to go to dinner and breakfast and lunch like this? When you came to Camp Minsi, you brought your own plates, your own forks, knives, any kind of utensils you needed. And at mess call, you lined up and you went into these tents. They're about 16 feet wide, 35 feet long. And I believe there's 2 or 3 of them here. And you would go through, get your slop, sit at a table, eat, and you'd get up, go out the other end, and wash your dishes. So it was probably a very long process. No evidence of them doing songs, skits, or cheers at the meals, but it's possible that they did. But I think that was probably a later thing that happened once, we had dining halls and whatnot. Here they are on Mount Tammany, up for a climb. And here's a view from Mount Tammany, higher up from where they were, down into the river. Mount Minsi's here, Mount Tammany is that railroad track I told you about. And this is some road, they're currently here, this is I-80. This is not I-80 because I-80 didn't exist until probably the 50s when the interstate highway system went in. But it certainly did not exist when this picture was taken in the 20s. So I'm not sure what road that is. Other side was 611. So in 1925, they had a bit of a shake-up. The first Bethlehem Area Council executive was Leon John Argetzinger. He was hired in 1918, served until 25 when he moved to Omaha, Nebraska to be the council executive for that Scout Council in Omaha. And so in this article, they talk about how they formed a committee to find a new Scout executive / camp director, because the executive was always the camp director back then. At the same meeting, they voted to move Camp Minsi from Delaware Water Gap to a place called Dick Chapman's Lodge, which is in a town that is now just called Chapman's, but back in the day it was called Chapman's Quarry because there's a quarry there owned by the Chapmans. This is a little island of a town in the middle of Moore Township, which is near Bath, Pennsylvania, just north of Bethlehem. And so the council voted to move it, but it never happened because the rest of the articles talk about the Delaware Water Gap. So this is the guy that they hired. To me, this is the father of Camp Minsi. His name is Jesse J. Wilcox. They called him Chief, as Scouts often called their council executives. We had Chief Wilcox. Easton had Chief Culpepper. I forget the guy from Allentown, but he was Chief so-and-so. He is the longest serving council executive, as far as I know, at least in the history of Bethlehem Council and Minsi Trails Council. He served for 37 years, retired in 1962, died in 1969. He only had one daughter. He never had any sons. A friend of his, when he lived in Williamsport, said, "Hey, this scouting movement is pretty incredible, and we've got these kids, but we need scoutmasters. Why don't you come be a scoutmaster?" He said yes, and 8 months later, he became the council executive of the Williamsport Council. So he must have been quite a leader for him to advance that quickly with something like that. And he is the only person we know of to serve as camp director in all 4 Camp Minsi locations, which you're learning about now. So even though they didn't move to Dick Chapman's Lodge in 1925, 2 years later they had to move because the Easton Council in 26 started making noises about buying the land that they leased and the land that Camp Minsi leased from the Philadelphia Trust Company. Now, why the Bethlehem Area Council did not, counter this with their own sort of campaign to buy it, I will never know, but they didn't. And so it was announced in October 27 that Easton would be buying the land, and Camp Minsi was forced to move. Easton signed the deed in 1928, and in 1928, Camp Minsi was at a different location. But between 27 and 28, Jesse Wilcox and other people from the Council Executive Committee were searching for locations. And I know they searched in the Poconos because they considered Sailor's Lake, but they ultimately ended up choosing Tobyhanna Lake. Tobyhanna Lake is 5 miles in that direction from where we are. If you go down 940 and go north on 380, you'll see a sign to take you to Tobyhanna State Park. You can go down there today, and you can still see where Camp Minsi was. It's the exact same footprint, which I'll show you in a minute. So here's another little detour before we can talk about Stillwater Lake, which is its actual name, not Lake Stillwater, Stillwater Lake, and Tobyhanna Lake. We have to talk about ice harvesting. These are both man-made lakes that were made specifically for harvesting ice because for those of you who might not remember life before electricity, you did not have a refrigerator in your house. If you were rich, if you were middle class, upper middle class, you had an ice box. And in your ice box, you would put your fruits and vegetables. Up here, you would put your block of ice. You would get a block of ice from the ice company that harvested it from the lakes. And you would stick it up in there, put your frozen things up in there, cold air sinks, so it cooled the fruits and vegetables down below. If you lived on like a farm or near a creek, you could have a spring house. If you had a spring in your backyard, you could keep your food cool that way. Or if you were probably, I imagine, like most people, especially early on, you went to the market every single day to buy your food fresh. So in this area, there were many ice companies, and this man owned one of them. He had just happened to own the one that was harvesting ice from Tobyhanna Lake and also from Lake Stillwater. So he's a self-made, he would have been a billionaire in today's dollars. Immigrant, started off just delivering ice and coal to people in Brooklyn, New York. Like I said, he owned Tobyhanna and here. We'll talk about him a little bit later. His company was called the Mountain Ice Company. He was also involved in scouting in Brooklyn, but I'll tell you about that in a bit. So here, this does not work for me, so I have to exit out of here, and I will show you a video of ice being harvested right here on Lake Stillwater. This is 1921. You're going to see them using a lot of mechanical, gas-powered, diesel-powered saws and instruments. Prior to that, it would have been all horse-drawn things. And you will see some horses here too. They're still using them. Some people were brave enough to drive their cars onto the lake. Now, you may not know it, but this lake here, and probably Tobyhanna, I don't know for sure, are not very deep. The deepest part of this lake is probably somewhere between 7 and 10 feet deep. So it's not very deep. Most of it you can walk in up to your chest. So if you ever fall out of your boat and you're struggling, just stand up. So they would go out and they would cut these giant slabs of ice, and then they would push them along like an ice gondola to the ice house, where they would get cut down into rows and columns, just like an Excel spreadsheet. And those blocks of ice that they cut out were then stored in the ice house. So here they are pushing it along to the ice house, and with the help of their four-legged buddies there. These men would have lived here at the camp on Lake Stillwater at the big house. Here they are. It's already been cut up. They're shoving it into the ice house. The guys in there are pulling it in, and then somebody else will take it and stack it. Now these ice houses were about 30 feet wide, 60 feet wide, 100 feet long, and 30 feet tall, or maybe they were 30 and 60 tall, something like that. But they were gargantuan buildings, and there were two of them here and two of them at Tobyhanna. So here they are, bringing it in and stacking it up. You don't really get to see. But by the way, you can search this on YouTube. Just do a search for Lake Stillwater ice harvesting, and there's a 15-minute long video that this is cut down from. So the trains would pull right up to the ice house, and they would shove the ice into the trains would back out to their turnaround, and they would either go east to New Jersey and New York, or they would go south to the Lehigh Valley and down into Philadelphia, and I believe also over to the Reading area. So these ice out, when they did this ice harvesting, they had to pile, from floor to ceiling, because this ice had to last all year round. So not only did they need the ice to deliver to people, they needed the ice there to keep the building cold, so that the ice within it would stick around long enough for them to deliver it. All right, so Lake Tobyhanna, as I said, is 5 miles that way, 5.5 miles that way. Similar dimensions to our lake, but not the same configuration. It's a mile long and about half a mile wide at its widest. But down here is an ice house. There would have been an ice house here. It very likely burned down. I don't know for sure. But this picture was taken in 1939, 38 or 39. So they had, by like the mid-30s, started to tear down some of these ice houses because they no longer needed them, because of electricity and refrigeration and all of that. So obviously this being a lake is a lot safer to boat on and swim in than the Delaware River, so I'm sure that they appreciated that. Right here, this little black dot is a very large 3-story building that they were able to, that was part of their lease from Mountain Ice Company, and they used it for recreation, dining hall, kitchen, first aid, trading post, camp office, camp quarters, staff quarters, all sorts of things, rainy day recreation. So this footprint is there today. I was just over there this past summer for the first time, and as you can see, this ice house site is right here, and here's that exact same site. The ice house is gone, torn down. Here's the road, here's the road. This is where Camp Minsi was. I know that because some of these photos in here show me this barren piece of land right here. They would set their, they had like a main teepee that I guess was for the camp director, and then the other tents were set up in like a U shape, sort of around that teepee and facing the lake. And then later on, they built tent platforms and camping sites in the forest around where they are. So they would have been, this is again 1928 to 1949. You did not have all the development that you see up here today. So these guys were surrounded, town of Tobyhanna is like out here more, but these guys were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of acres of forest that they could just go out and play in. They were very lucky We have 66,000 acres of forest above us here. Once you get beyond the camp property line, which is about maybe 3/4 of a mile north of here, then you have the state game lands, and there's 67,000 acres of forest up there. But today you go there and you've got a nice recreation area here. That 3-story building would have been right here, and now they have a beach over here, which is like this section. So it's pretty cool to go over there and you can stand there and just be like, wow, like our guys were here. They camped here every summer for 21 years. It was so cool. So they opened late. They had a late run this year. Went from July to September. The camp itself was not large, but they had this large lake, and so they got themselves some big boats, like Camilla. You can't see it, but this boat is very long. It's a double-masted sailboat. There's one mast here and another mast right behind it. This picture is about this big in this book up here. So I blew it up, and I think it's a beautiful picture. And here they are in one of their whale boats. That's what this says down here. It's a whale boat. Who can guess how many people were in this boat? Just shout it out.
30.
Close. What? Lower.
20.
Close. 25. 25. 24 boys and 1 adult. And that adult's smart. He's saying he-ho, and they're doing the work. But yeah, there's 25 kids in there. So that's one of several giant boats that they had. Again, like they did on the Delaware, they had their diving platform. They built a diving platform here on Tobyhanna Lake. They're not diving out off of it at this moment because there's a boat right there. But they would have shoved this out into, not the center of the lake, but near it, and had a lot of fun. This is your 1942 camp staff. Anybody remember this guy's name? Wilcox. That's Jesse J. Wilcox. The Wilcox Handicrafts Lodge is named after him. I just put up a little picture in there that explains why it's named after him. And also Wilcox Outpost that is named after him. So this is that 3-story building that I was telling you about. It's a very large building, and it is a building that is built out of this material right here. So this is what I believe is a terracotta or some sort of terracotta-like material. And does anybody know why it's hollow? Take a guess, anyone? Air insulation. Air is a great insulator. So when you trap it in a block like this in a building, you got good insulation. We have cinder blocks today. Back then they had these. This one was from one of the ruins on the southern shore of our lake. And I went over there during staff week and I pulled it out to bring it over here to show you guys. But the Mountain Ice Company, they built their buildings out of similar materials. So that's this one here. And I just love this old car here. All right, this is an example of a building that they would have built on site. They only built temporary structures. They did not own this land, so they did not want to build anything permanent. They did consider buying it in the 30s, but it never happened. I don't know why it never happened, but it didn't happen. There's a lucky troop that won the cleanest camp award, I guess. And these guys are building an effort, maintaining this shack here. How many kids are in this picture? 3. All right, good. Now again, this picture is about this big. So when I first looked at it through a magnifying glass, I didn't notice this guy right here. Here they are playing volleyball. Yes, volleyball existed 100 years ago. So if you went to camp in 1940s, probably in the 30s too, although I don't have any evidence of it, you would have gotten a patch similar to this. Not very exciting. It's just a felt patch. These here are silk screen in some way, but these two here seem to be all felt. Unless maybe it's just tricking. Yeah. I don't see any cracks in this or this, so I believe that it's all felt. All right, so 21 years they were at Lake Tobyhanna, and in 1949, Sam Rubel decides he's going to sell the lake because he doesn't need it anymore. There's refrigerators, nobody needs ice anymore, so they're not harvesting, and why hold on to the property? And so he sold it to the Tobyhanna Rod and Gun Club. And the poor Tobyhanna Rod and Gun Club had it for 2 years, and then it was taken over by the state to form Tobyhanna State Park, and it was taken over, the other part of it is taken over by the federal government to have the Tobyhanna Army Depot there. So they didn't have it for very long, and had we bought it, we would have lost it. So it's a good thing we didn't buy it. But now we needed some place to go. Wilcox knew Rubel, so they were friends. Their wives were friends, and so he would go to New York. You know, when they heard about this camp being sold, and he would plead with, you know, from what I've told, stories are that he'd gone there a few times to talk to Rubel and talk him into donating one of his properties to the Bethlehem Area Council so Camp Minsi could continue. And with the help of this judge, Albert Conway, who was a member of the Brooklyn Council, which Rubel was also a member of, even though he only had daughters, he had 2 daughters, he got involved in scouting. And this judge was sort of the, you know, the guy that pushed him into donating this land. Now the rumor is that Sam Rubel owned this property that we're on, and Mrs. Rubel owned the property where the Stillwater Estates were. Mrs. Rubel and Mrs. Wilcox got into an argument and no longer liked each other. So she said to Sam, "You can donate your half, I'm keeping mine." And that's the story. I don't know if it's true, but that's the story that I've heard as to why we didn't get the whole lake and the surrounding property. But Mrs. Rubel was not all that evil, because she had to take over and see this whole deal through, because her husband died suddenly in April. The deed was not signed until May. So when he died, she got that land. She got this land. She very well could have said, "You know what? You're not getting anything. Go find someplace else." But she didn't. So we've got to commend her for that. She took care of all of the donations. So it was donated to the BSA, right in the same document, the deed. I have a copy of it. It goes from Mountain Ice to the BSA, from the BSA to Bethlehem Area Council. And actually, if you look at the property or the tax records and the parcel today, this camp split. The Tobyhanna Township and Coolbaugh Township split the camp. Southern part of the camp and part of where we are now, which is in Tobyhanna Township, is still in the name of the Bethlehem Area Boy Scout Council, which has not existed since 1969. I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so here we are at this beautiful land, these 1,200 acres, or he donated 1,100 acres. We bought another 150, 120, something like that. And it's where we are still today. So this photograph was taken in 1939, 10 years before we ever got here. What do you see up in here that's very interesting? Shout it out. What do you see up there?
Logging
Roads. But they weren't for logging. That's a good guess. But this, and when I was a kid, I was told that they forested all this land, which did happen, but it was before this lake was formed. So, but I was told that they forested the land, they put the logs in the lake, ran them down to Naomi, ran them down to Pocono Lake, which is the 3rd lake in the lake here, and they were cut up in Pocono. Pocono did have a sawmill, but it was the only lake that was used for logging. Lake Naomi was built specifically for recreation in the summer and ice harvesting in the winter. Lake Stillwater was built for ice harvesting, but in the summer, I'm guessing, because of certain clues that I have, rather than it becoming a sort of recreational area for the public, it was used by the employees of the ice company. Charles Edwards, who was called Pop Edwards, was a manager at the ice company, and out about in here is on some of the maps you can see it called Pop Edwards Stand. And so Pop Edwards had his deer stand out here. So these are roads that are being used not by loggers, but by hunters. They may have used horse and buggy on these, it's very possible, but they most certainly used gasoline and diesel-powered Jeeps and trucks and things like that. And they really, I mean, these are very wide. To be seen from this aerial photograph, which was taken in the summertime, this is not wintertime, because you can see the leaves on the trees, we can very clearly see this trail. So if you go, this part of the trail right here is right down there. It goes right through Scoutcraft, past the fire circle, and down to the archery and rifle range, which are about here. So if you turn right, you will go out this road, and you'll get to a cabin that's right here that we'll talk about in a minute. If you go straight, you'll go up what we always called the junk trail, because that's where all the trails kind of combine. Its official name, at least according to the maps from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's called the Tunkhannock Trail. So this is the Tobyhanna Trail, I'm sorry. This trail went from here all the way up to the town of Tobyhanna, which would have been up in here somewhere. This is the white trail, this is the blue trail, this is the orange trail. So, down here we have where plant number 1 was. There would have been an ice house right here. We'll get a closer look at this in a minute. It burned down in 1919. This was plant number 2 over in here. It was torn down in 1936. So way before we ever got the land. Here's a bit of a closer look at the southern shore of the lake. If you go into the ad pad, you'll see a giant aerial photograph very similar to this, but not this one, with the same picture basically. And the reason is because when we first came here, we got the land in 49, but summer camp didn't start until 50. People tell you 49, they're wrong. It didn't start until 1950. So in 1950, they made camp and they used this area here. This is where Camp Minsi, the tents would have been in this area, and all the program and whatnot would have happened in here. Over here we have a blacksmith shop and a troop cabin that was used up until the 60s. Don't know what these other buildings are. These are the railroad tracks that the trains would have come in here, pull in the back of the ice house here, load up, go out. This one came in front of the ice house, load up, go out. And again, this burned in 1919. This was torn down in 1936. So here you just get a little bit of a closer look at central Camp Minsi. Here you have the big house. You can still see the big house today. It's dilapidated and falling down. It's a real shame. I try not to talk about it too much because it makes me cry because I spend a lot of time in there. We'll talk about it in a bit though. So that's still over there. Hopefully now that we've got all these millions of dollars for the sale of Trexler, we'll be able to tear it down and put something nicer, if not there, somewhere else. But there's the big house. That was used as their camp office, trading post, health lodge, staff quarters, kitchen, dining hall, etc. Right now, you would have entered probably around in here somewhere. The ranger's house is about in here. The maintenance shop is here. So speaking of cabins, they had a troop cabin, which is directly across the lake over here. We've been directly across the lake. And then if you go down to the rifle range and you turn right and you keep going, eventually you'll come to this chimney. Has anybody been out to Hunter's Cabin? Okay, a few of you have. Very good. It's very interesting. It's always been sort of mysterious to me. I never imagined in my life that I would ever see a picture of the actual Hunter's Cabin. And lo and behold, in the mid-90s, sadly someone passed away, and they had a bunch of slides from camp that were donated to a person who made some prints for us. Thankfully, because that person later got really mad about something and decided to burn all the slides. So, whatever. So, but we do have a picture of Hunter's Cabin, and this is what it looked like. It was very rustic. Unfortunately, you probably can't see this that well, but hopefully we'll get a picture online soon of what it is. So, like I said, it was used as a hunting cabin by the Mountain Ice employees, and then as troop cabins once we had this land. Probably starting right in 1949, they would have been down there camping out. But summer camp didn't happen until 1950. So in the estates across the lake, they opened up in the early 60s. They've got kids over there. Some of their houses are very close to where Hunter's cabin was, so they would come over to Hunter's cabin and they would vandalize it. So the council decided they don't want to have Hunter's cabin anymore. They didn't want any of the ice house buildings over there for the same reason, so they tore those down. But the story that I was always told, and it was corroborated by someone who was here last week, a former staff member from the 80s, when they decided to get rid of this, they thought, well, we're going to burn it down. So they drove a fire truck out to there, and the ranger, who was this burly sort of man's man, you know, back in the 60s, 70s, I knew him very briefly. He was kind of like intimidating. But anyway, so the story is that he went in the building, put gasoline everywhere, was walking out. He was a smoker, so he lit a cigar or a cigarette, was walking away, threw the cigar or cigarette behind him, and as we know, gas fumes, when they sort of get very dense, they explode, and so there was this huge explosion, and it threw him about 20 feet onto his face that way. So if you're ever going to burn down a building, don't use gasoline. And don't smoke. So, 1950, they hold the very first dedication of the land to the boys. And again, this is on the southern shore of the camp. This part of the camp did not exist. Mrs. Rubel came to this dedication. She gave a speech. We don't have the text of the speech, but she gave the boys this plaque. And that plaque is hanging down in the ad pad. You can walk in there, it's at nose height, and you can read it. I don't know the text here to read it to you, but you can go and see it after the presentation. So that was Mrs. Rubel right there, and we thank her for doing what she did. Now I have one single picture from the 1950s of this actual camp. All the pictures that I'll show you from this point forward came from the newspapers. So this picture is of the boys at the big house. There was a flagpole about here. The big house would have been over here. They're standing there to do their color ceremony. Now, prior to this side of the camp opening, they can only accommodate 50 to 75 boys at any time. That's true for Tobyhanna, and that's true for the Delaware Water Gap. You didn't have 200, 400 kids. It was 70, 75 kids. Many of them stayed up for the entire summer. Not all, but many of them did. This is one of the ice house buildings where I got this block from. This is what their waterfront would have looked like over on the southern shore. So if you're at our waterfront and you look across the cove and just a little bit to the right, that's where this would have been. It would have been on that right hand, that's the southern shoreline. This looks like water, but it's dirt. They've got this jammed up against the dirt. And here's some of those boats I imagine they brought over with them from Tobyhanna. Now this is my favorite picture, I think, in the entire world that I've ever seen. So, and I put it here just because I think it's hilarious. So what do we notice about this tent? And just shout it out. Anything? Look down here. The platforms are too short. The platforms end here and here, but the tent ends here and here. So these two geniuses didn't want to be next to each other like a married couple, so they decided to spread their cots out, but in order to have their cots spread out, they had to improvise. One of them was smarter than the other. This guy took a nice big, sort of squarish stone and put it under his leg. But look what this guy did. 1, 2, 3 little stones on that leg, and probably the same on the other. So as soon as this kid sat down in that bunk, he would have been on the ground, I guarantee it. And if not as soon as, well, shortly thereafter. So I just think that's hilarious, that anybody would think that that's a good idea. They probably, they couldn't separate, these are called duck boards probably, just because of how narrow they are. But they could not have separated this platform because one side is much shorter than the other, and his bed still would not have fit on it. So I just love that. So this is from 1956, this article. In 1956, they started to outgrow their land. So just like what happened in '69 with the movement gathering or gaining scouts, there were many more scouts in '56 than there were in '49 and etc. So they needed more room. They knew right from the beginning when they got this land that they wanted to develop the western coast of the land, the western shoreline of the land. And so in 1956, they started putting out articles telling the public that they would soon be having a capital campaign to raise funds to build the new Camp Minsi. So this is one of those articles. This is the big house where the Ice House employees would have stayed, and then later on was the office, dining hall, kitchen, yada, yada, yada. Here they are in the big house, probably in the kitchen, which was a room behind this one. And this is their shower house. I don't know where this was, but it's pretty crude. We've got the water tanks here, and this is their heating source right here. This is either a coal stove or a wood stove, but it's a stove that's just out in the elements. So imagine if it rained, you probably didn't get a shower, or at least not a hot shower. This is the only photograph that I had. This was taken from I was given a bunch of photos, and in it was a negative that was about this big, so it probably came from a Brownie camera. I held it up to the light, and I instantly knew what it was because I know the big house. I took it to Dan's Camera City, and they blew it up into an 8x10 photo for me, which this is a scan of. So this is the dining room in the big house, just off the kitchen, just off the little TV room that was there, that we used as a TV room. And it's probably 20 feet long and 15 wide, something like that, 25 feet long. But this was their dining hall. So you can imagine, you really could only accommodate 70 kids, 50 kids, because this was a very small room. It was about maybe, if I'm remembering right, so probably from that wall to about somewhere in here, and just about maybe to where I am, maybe back like here. So it was not a very big room. Even for 50 kids, that would have been crowded. So, as I said, in '56, they started telling the public about their capital campaign. This is the very first capital campaign they've ever had in 40 years of existence. So they said, we're going to start this in May. We have a goal of $245,000 in pledges. And they started on May 5th, they went to May 27th, and lo and behold, by May 27th, they did it. They had $245,000 worth of pledges. They also got some big checks from Bethlehem Steel and from Lehigh University, both in Bethlehem. But most of the donations came from families and individuals. They would have been on a subscription plan, and they would have sent in a monthly stipend every month for about a year. By the time that year was over, they actually ended up with about $246,000 to $247,000. In today's money, this would have been somewhere between about $2.5 million to $3 million, and they raised it in 1 month. So they started building their camp at the end of 1957. In December, they started cutting the roads. They already had this road here, but they had to cut the service road and Outer Circle Road. They had to bring in the electricity, the sewer lines, water lines. They put in the water tank. And then in January of 1958, they surveyed this building where we are, and this was the very first building built on the new camp property. This building used to only go to about that third bay of windows on that side. You can see the delineation in the concrete, both inside and outside, but it was not as big as it is now. But this was the first building, the kitchen, and this room to be put under roof. They also built the health lodge, the cook's cabin, central showers, and that's about it. They opened camp in 1958. They had to open, and of course they built the campsites. They built 6 of them with plans for 2 more in the near future. So June of 1958 rolls around. There's a problem with the well. They're having a problem with some contracts. I don't know if it was from staff or construction. There was really bad weather, and so they were supposed to open and for week 1, and they could not open here. So they said, if anybody wants to come up, we'll run camp in the old site. And you had 25 scouts that wanted to come up, and so they spent their first week over there, and week 2 they came here. So now while the kids were here in 1958, they were still building all these buildings. They had to build the staff cabin, the director's cabin, they would have built the ad pad in 58 for the summer. But that, and then later on they built in the 60s, they built the handicrafts, the trading post, econ lodge, things like that. And I assume because of all this construction going on, because things weren't done and they couldn't show their donors what they donated, they decided to hold off on dedicating the camp until everything was done, again, except for the few buildings that were built in the 60s. But in 1959, a year after they opened the camp, they had their second Camp Minsi dedication here at this location, probably in this very room. So, yeah, they did that 1 year later. So now I put a bunch of Z's here because since 1958, we've had a lot of great staff members come through here. We've had a lot of great programs happen. We've built some buildings, we've expanded buildings, we've closed in buildings, we've put up pavilions or things like that. To me, that's not history. You guys don't care. I'm not going to go through and tell you that this was expanded in 2007 and that was closed in 2019. It's boring. So I'm going to show you a few more pictures, and then we'll switch subjects a little bit, and we'll move on. But basically what you see here now as far as the layout of the camp is essentially what was here in 1958, with the exception of, they added staff campsites 7 and 8, and then eventually 9 and 10 for a long time, and then once the girls things happened in whenever that was, 2015 or whatever, they started separating out some more of the sites so we could accommodate girl troops and more boy troops if possible. So now we have 12 sites, but the other 2 sites are kind of made up of a mishmash of other original sites. But anyway, so the layout of the camp is essentially what it was in 1958. Here are some pictures from that first summer. Here we are at the waterfront. The boat section of the waterfront was not where it is now. It was kind of off to the left on the side, so you can see these rocks. It's very rocky there. This is right there. It's still there today. The archery range would have been down this way. It was not where it is down there now. That was just a rifle range in the beginning. So it would have been down there behind the staff site. And here's a guy with a ham radio. Sam Van Norman, who is not here this week. He's teaching Radio Merit Badge. He's got ham radios in the old quartermaster of handicrafts. He's got one of my radios that I repaired in 1948, RCA tube radio. He's got that in there. But radio's always been a part of Camp Minsi. In 1919 and 1920, there were 2 scoutmasters that set up a telegraph wireless radio in the campsite because you didn't have AM FM yet. You just had the telegraph, so they would telegraph to Columbia and say Johnny forgot his toothpaste. Mom and Dad would take his toothpaste to the council office, and when the council executive / camp director went back to the office once a week, he'd bring Johnny's toothpaste back to camp for him. So, and they'd order groceries and use it for emergencies and whatnot. But radio started right in 1919, and we had it through into the 1950s and throughout time ever since. This is a brochure up here. It cost $20 to come to camp in 1965. It's equivalent to about $200 today. In 1919, it would have cost you $4.50, which is equivalent to about $78, $79 today. So even adjusted for inflation, it was a lot cheaper back then to come to camp. And so some of you guys looked at this book up here. That's where a few of these things came from. I just thought I'd throw this in here for fun because the buildings have changed and it's a little bit interesting. So who knows what this building is? Everybody gets fooled by the chimney. When I first saw that, I thought, oh, that's the dining hall. But no, it's actually the administration building, the ad pad down at the bottom. Why it's called ad pad, I don't know. I think it was, because back in the 60s and 70s, like, hey, you want to come to my pad, man? So it's the admin building, and it's on a pad, so it's the ad pad. So that's that. So that hasn't changed really at all, except for the windows. Who knows what this is? Handicrafts, that's right. So when Handicrafts was built in 1962, it was dedicated to J.J. Wilcox. It did not have side walls here, and it did not have front and back anything, garage doors or anything. In 1982, they closed this in, and they had half walls here. So those of you who were around prior to 2019 would know that Handicrafts was still kind of open, but it only had half walls. There were garage doors here and up front. And back here used to be the quartermaster's store, which was also made in 1982. And I know that because I have the drawings for the design for them to do that. When the new shower house was built, they moved quartermaster into the old shower house. How about this one? Trading post, right. So back in the day, there was a window on the side here. You would have gone up to the window, asked for your candy. They didn't sell t-shirts and all that kind of stuff back then. Even back in my day in the 80s and 90s, they didn't really sell a whole lot of that stuff. Maybe mugs or patches and whatnot. In the mid-90s, Bob Adriel, who was the ranger, poured another pad here, and he extended the trading post out to the footprint it has today. There was a window on it initially, and you can still see the outline of it there. That got used for about 2 years, and then they decided to reconfigure everything, move everything inside. All right, so that's about it for like the history of camp. So now I thought I would just move on to what I consider to be the icons of camp, to be the things that when you come to Camp Minsi, it's like, okay, I'm at Minsi now. I know I'm at Minsi. But the first of those things, of course, is our insignia. So right now we have the turtle, but prior to the turtle, they had those felt patches, and then in 1952, somebody designed this patch. We're going to recreate this patch for next year, hopefully, for the 105th anniversary. So look forward to that next year, and possibly this decal too. Now, again, we do not know where the turtle came from, but we know that it was around at least as far back as 1962, because this is the 62-63 calendar that follows the fiscal year from September to August. And here we have the turtle, but he's turned upside down. And then in 63 and 4, they did this cute little neckerchief, both of which are over there. I'm out of my shell and Minsi bound. I thought that's adorable. I would love to see that recreated. So the most visible icon of Camp Minsi, of course, is the rock. Somebody was saying up here, they looked at these pictures and said, oh, the rock was originally green? Well, we don't know. I don't know what color. We don't know when they started painting it, but the staff painted it. And sometimes it would be green. This is from the 1980s. This is from 1991. I know this because my friend Eric painted this. He's an artist. This is Michelangelo's God and Man, except it's our turtle mascot and the red squirrel. The red squirrel used to terrorize us in the staff site. So, yep, right now it's red. In 2009, when I was laid off and I came up here, nobody had painted the rock for like 10 years. It was looking hideous. And I was mad, so I painted it gold, just to make other people mad and to give them a reason to paint it again. They didn't until the next year, but there it was. I was going to make a game out of it, never did. I think it looks cool as a big gold nugget. But it's been a weather rock. We had some scouters that came over from the Middle East, and so there was a Middle East painting on it at one point when I was a kid. All sorts of different things that are lost to time. This again, unless you're somebody who's older, who's been around for a while, you would never be inside this building because it is condemned. It is falling down. The roof is currently collapsing in. The floors have already caved in. But prior to the mid-2000s, you could have come up here and you could have rented out the big house. I personally spent probably a minimum of 60 weekends in this house. I was a member of the Explorer Post. We spent 6 weekends a year up at this camp in the off season to do work at the camp or to go out to do ski trips. We did Thanksgivings and stuff like that. And it all happened in here. Again, built for the ice house workers, then served as many functions as possible in the beginning and until everything moved over here. And then in the late 70s and 1980, it was converted to a conference center and what it looked like when I was a kid. This is what it looked like in the prior to that renovation. So here's that paneling that you saw in that other picture. This is the room where the boys were eating dinner. When this camp opened, it got used. There was no ranger shop yet. There was a house, but no shop. And so a lot of the junk and stuff got put into the big house. This is that outbuilding that I pointed out when the boys were at Colors. That's made of this here. And where I got it. And this is what the beds looked like even up into the days in the 90s when I was living in there. And this is what it looked like when they dedicated in 1980 for the Wygant Conference Center. Got a new roof. They tore everything out of the inside, replaced all the plumbing, electricity, and the windows, and they tore off the porch and put a new porch on, new siding. It was a nice place. So the other the second most visible icon here is right out there. That's our cannon. I just painted it during staff week this year, so it looks nice for you guys. For a long time, we had no idea what these inscriptions meant. Sure, we knew what 1861 meant. Of course, it was made in 1861. And we realized, yes, it weighs 821 pounds. Just the cannon, just the black one, 821 pounds. But we didn't know what this was or what this was. And then Don Friedhoff, who's the ranger over at Camp Trexler now, his partner, Lisa, was the camp director here for many years, and he knew about the cannon, and he went looking for information, and he came upon this book that gave us all the information we ever wanted about this series of cannons. This was made in 1861. It was one of 1,000 cannons. It was number 74 of 1,000 cannons. It was made at the Phoenixville Ice Company, CO, in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and it was inspected by Theodore Thaddeus Sobieski, late TTSL. Those are the stamp of the inspector. It was not put out into the field until 1862, but it would have been put out into the field during the Civil War with a unit. Whether or not it ever fired any kind of munitions or anything during the war, we do not know, but it was. It would have been on a carriage just like this. This is the exact same cannon, but somewhere else, and not modified. So it would have been loaded from the front. Everything would have been loaded from the front. There is no breech on the back here. In the early 1900s, the breech, this part was cut off, this little knob, and they cut a hole through the side that you can still see today. And it was changed to a breech loading cannon. So you would put the breech in there, and then you put your ordnance and your powder in, put the breech in, and then fire it. They were mounted specifically on this type of a base. When I was a kid, everyone said, oh, it's a naval cannon because it's on that base. Not true. Not true. These are bases that were made specifically for these cannons when they were turned into salute cannons. This is actually a rifle. It's a rifle cannon. If you look at the inside of it, it's rifled. You'll see stripes that go around the interior of it. I have it closed off now, but just take my word for it. So that's our cannon. And that's what it looks like now after my paint job that I'm proud of. And this cannon came over from Wygant. So when Wygant closed in '69, we got their Ranger, we got some of their staff, and we got their cannon. So we know it was at Wygant at least up until this picture's from the 1950s, but it was there in the 1940s as well. Where they got it, we do not know. They did fire it. They had a shotgun breach, just like we have. When I was a kid in the 80s, it wasn't firing, but it had fired prior to the 80s. I know this because I've asked people who worked here. And then in the 90s, the Ranger had somebody create a new shotgun breach, which is on it to this day, but will be coming off because we're no longer allowed to fire it. We're going to try to, if we can find the drawings for the original breach, we're going to find it. Did anybody get to see our tractor this week? No. So back in the day, before they started, well, prior to COVID, when you come to camp, you would drop your stuff, all your equipment in the parking lot, and we would take it to your site for you on our tractor. Our tractor that we call Wanda. There's a fish called Wanda, and now there's a tractor called Wanda, right? And so for years, we never knew like where this tractor came from. I had, for some reason in my head, I thought it was a 1964 model, but we know by its serial number that it was produced in 1958. So it occurred to me, what happened in 1958? Anybody know? This camp opened. The new Camp Minsi opened on this side in 1958. Remember I said this building was built first? Well, they bought their Ranger a brand new tractor. So this tractor has been serving us for 65 years. Back in the 80s, it would not have looked this nice, and it would have had a Mack Bulldog on the front. In the 90s, one of the guys in the Explorer Post who was a farmer said, hey, I can get the original medallion, I can get you stickers. This is before internet stuff. And he got those things. We had it painted. The Ranger added this roll bar, which is the headboard of a bed that used to be in the health lodge. And that's exactly what it looks like still today. And this is from last year. This is Ranger John driving the tractor. They use this for brush runs. On the weekends, the staff will collect brush to put down at the fire circle. They don't build fires like we used to. We had giant base logs this big around, and we had a big council fire. They don't build them like that. But anyway, so that's Wanda. She's been lovingly taken care of for many, many years by staff. So the other thing we have here that you'll notice are the totem poles. They started right in 1958. There was a contest to see what troop could make the nicest totem poles. And they made these things, and as you can see, they're gargantuan. They've got to be 20 feet tall, at least, if not more. Those came here, and they were put in the parade field. They didn't last very long because they were not here. I've asked guys from the 70s and 80s if they remember them. They do not remember them. Now, I just was introduced to somebody who was on staff in 1958, so I'm going to be asking him about those. But totem poles have been a thing here right from the beginning of the new camp. Whether if they did them over there, I don't know. I don't have any evidence of it. Here are some past totem poles. This one's lying down behind the Handicrafts Lodge right now, waiting to be burned. That was made by this guy, my friend Hector. Here he is working on it with that. Remember the picture in the beginning with me and the other guy? That's him. That's the other guy that everybody thinks that they used to confuse us for brothers. But he made this pole. It took him 2 years, and it was down at the point below the health lodge there. And it lasted maybe 5 years, 6 years, and then it rotted away, and it was gone. Hector's lasted a lot longer, but it is rotted. It was taken down. This one is still there. Does anybody know? Well, this was in the parking lot. My friend Bobby made this, but it rotted away. Does anybody know why this pole is still there? It's still right down there at the base of the parade field.
Telephone pole or cedar?
Very good. That's a great. Was that a guess, or did you know?
This is a guess. That's all there is to be.
That is amazing. You're the very first person to get that didn't actually know it. This is made of a telephone pole. It was carved in 1982, so this is its 41st year standing at the bottom of the parade field. Mike Maloney carved it. He got some bunch of cheap chisels and a telephone pole and carved it. And every 10 to 15 years he comes up and he replaces the wings and the nose because they are not made of a telephone pole. We're almost done here. Give me about 5 more minutes. So on the fireplace here, you'll see one of these. These are Hopi Indian sculptures made by a man called Joe Kiss. He was a scoutmaster who, in the early 60s, traveled out west, became enamored with the Hopi Indians who live out west, came home and started making all these sculptures. He lived on Freemansburg Avenue in Bethlehem, which is a very busy road. I'm sure his wife absolutely loved him because he filled their yard with these sculptures. But he also made some for us, and they put them on the fireplace. Now, at the beginning of the summer, I took them off to refurbish them. I've got one that's back on, and I need the Rangers' help to get the other one back on there, but they are still here, and they've been here for probably about 50 years. So the other thing, this is an often overlooked thing. If you go to the AdPad, the administration building, you'll see this beautifully carved door trim. And again, we didn't know where it came from, how long it's been here, but then I got a hold of this brochure from the dedication in '59, and there it is. So we know it was here right from the beginning of the new Camp Minsi in '58, '59. I think this thing is just absolutely beautiful. Go down there. I encourage you to go and check it out. It's very well carved. The characters are very neat. As far as I can tell, it has never been repaired. There are no chunks of wood missing or like new chunks put in and carved out or anything like that. It does need a new varnish, which I'll probably do next year, but that's how you see it today is almost exactly how the boys would have seen it in 1958. And that's the end of the icons. We have one iconic program, and who can tell me what it is? The longest running program in Camp Minsi history, and you went on it today if you went on it. A mock hike. So the mock hike was started in 1977 by Econ Director Bob Rice. It was kind of from what I'm told, a hippie kind of person, and so he wanted this to be sort of a get in touch, become one with nature sort of event. But if you've ever been on the muck hike, you know so many people go on it. It's really difficult, unless you only have a group of 5 or 10, it's really difficult to stop and say, this is a sundew, this is a hemlock tree, this is how the muck is made, this kind of thing. So it quickly devolved into what it is today, which is a strop in the swamp. Right? It is the inspiration for the Trexler Rangers course, which I just took today for the very first time. Today was the very last time that anybody can ever take it, because this is the last week for Camp Trexler forever, as far as the summer camp for the Boy Scouts. So I went on that today. It was a very interesting and neat course, but it was inspired, this muck hike inspired one of their staff members from the mid-'80s to create the Trexler Rangers course. But like I said, it started in '77, so it's what, like 45, 46 years old, and it's the longest continually running program. All right, so that's it. So I'll turn the lights on, and if you have questions, just shout them out. Anybody? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Again, if you're interested in being a part of the Heritage Committee or helping me with my research,